Welcome, welcome, welcome to another Mad Professor broadcast. What's going on, my brothers? What's going on, my brothers? I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you're having a good Friday night. And I hope that this broadcast contributes to your evening and to your weekend. My brothers, I am sitting here in my humble abode in North Carolina, and I'm watching the classic sci-fi film of 1987. One of the most important and iconoclastic cinematic productions produced during the 1980s. And that is that film that helped to push Arnold Schwarzenegger over the top. Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that is the film that we all know as The Predator. And as I'm talking to you live, guys, I've got my TV screen to my right, and I am watching the last half of The Predator. And guys, I've been thinking about this over the last week and a half in light of what's been going on, in light of where we are in this space, guys. Last week, I watched the most recent iteration of the Predator franchise on Hulu called Prey. Many of you guys have already watched that film, Prey, on Hulu. And Prey is presented to us as an origin story, There have been a number of Predator films that have been produced since 1987. Predator 2, Aliens versus Predator, Aliens versus Predator, A Requiem, Predators, and The Predator. And none of the films, my guys, none of the films that came after the 1987 version of the initial installment of The Predator, featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger, has lived up to the standard that film created in 1987. And I want you all to sit with that. That we're talking about a film that was produced over 30 years ago. Over 30 years ago. A film whose storyline, a film whose special effects, a film that embodied a message about masculinity, traditional masculinity, which has stood the test of time. In this space, guys, in this space, there's a lot that has been said over the years about the film The Matrix. So much of the language that is a part of this space, this masculine space, which is shared by so many men, has been informed by the language that came out of the Wachowski brothers' iconic sci-fi film, The Matrix, which came out in 1999. And the Matrix, the first Matrix has stood the test of time. There was a lot in the Matrix that is philosophical, that is religious, that deals with fundamental human reality, that is so true that you can't refute it. But The Matrix is not the only film. The Matrix is not the only cinematic presentation or production that speaks to human reality as it is, the world as we know it. What's up, what's up, what's up, what's up, what's up, what's up, what's up? That's right, Mr. Bo Peel. That's right, Mr. Bo Peel. The Wachowski brothers are no longer the Wachowski brothers, the Jewish guys who created the first Matrix films, plural. They abandoned traditional masculinity and they became transgender. Just for you guys who don't know it, the guys who were behind the Matrix film, those guys, those Jewish guys, two Jewish guys, they became transgender. But they did not start out as transgenders. They did not start out as transgenders. They started out as men. They started out as biological men. And that film that came out in 1999 spoke to basic realities that biological men deal with and are forced to acknowledge and reckon with. But the Matrix is not the only text. The Matrix is not the only text. The Matrix is not the only masculine text. What's going on, brothers? What's going on? I'm happy to see. I see all the brothers in the house. Flames 2.0. What's going on? Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Jay Cleveland Green. Good to see you. Dwan Hottest. Good to see you, my brothers. My brother, Mulatto Vanguard, Zeke the Prospector, Jay Cleveland Green the second. I see you. I see you. I see you. Good to see all of you guys here in the place to be tonight. This brothers is a follow-up. This stream is a follow-up. I was going to schedule this stream much earlier this evening, but I decided against that. I was going to send out a notification as early as Wednesday, but I decided against that because I had to give more thought to this. I was going to make this a planned stream, but the way my mind works, sometimes I have to give things more thought. So here we are, here we are, here we are. Y'all see the title. Y'all see the title. And the title comes directly from the 1987 film, The Predator. The lead character being Dutch, a military man who was played by none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if you go back to that film, you will see so many stars. You will see Bill Duke, who went on to make films. He is a very, very prominent Black American male filmmaker. You will see Carl Weathers, who was in the Rocky franchise, who made a very, very good career in acting in Hollywood. You will also see Jesse Ventura, or those from my era who were into WWF, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. He was Jesse the Body Ventura, and he went on to become the governor of Minnesota. Oh, and let me just say this, Arnold Schwarzenegger, we're going to get to that. Arnold Schwarzenegger, not only did he go on to become an iconic person in terms of the genre of action and adventure, he became a two-term governor of California. So when you go back and you watch The Predator from 1987, you go back, when you watch The Predator from 1987, you will see that that film is filled with a whole bunch of major hitters. Schwarzenegger made this film on the heels of Terminator, which came out a couple of years earlier. Predator, in addition to the Terminator, pushed him over the top. Over the top. And you guys know I'm Gen X. You guys know that I'm Gen X. I'm Gen X. And it should be pointed out that this film, although I'm Gen X, and this film came out during my era when I was a kid when this film came out. I was a teenager. This film has been watched by generations since then. So that means that millennials have watched this film, Zs have watched this film, hell, baby boomers have watched this film. This film has appealed to people across generations, and it has stood the test of time. And we gotta talk about why this film has stood the test of time. And we gotta talk about it in relationship to traditional masculinity. So I watched the Hulu version, the most recent version of the Predator franchise, which is located, it was situated in the 18th century, in the 1700s. The context was Native America. It was a different time in U.S. history, a different time when Native people, indigenous people, found themselves under the onslaught of European imperialism, where you had here in the United States, you had the Spaniards, you had the French, you had the English, you had other people who were coming here seeking to control and dominate the land and take over native territories, the indigenous people of what we know as North America. And it's a very, very interesting story because it plays upon many of the themes that were first introduced in the first Predator film. But the thing that stands out, what separates Prey from the other films, is that it has a female protagonist. It has a female as a lead, a female as a warrior, a female who, in the film, and I don't want to give everything away. I don't want to, put out too many things out there. I don't want to spoil it for all of you all who haven't watched it. Many of you guys have already watched it. But you have a story about a female warrior who ultimately has to save her tribe from this threat, this alien extraterrestrial thing that uses North America as a playground for hunting. This alien force which has been around for a very, very, very long time. And the film Prey, in my perspective, was a fairly decent movie. It was a fairly decent movie. I have some of my colleagues who are in this space, they took issue with Prey. They found it far-fetched because of the female lead and some of what she had to go through in terms of becoming or being a warrior. But I thought the storyline was pretty decent. I like the fact that this was someone, so you have a female character who was working on behalf of her tribe, her tribe, her tribe. She is connected to her tribe. She is not an individualist. She is not someone who is trying to stand out apart from the culture that produced her. She's not trying to disown her culture. She is participating in the rituals, the masculine rituals of her culture. And in the film, she basically has to play a masculine role, the role of a warrior. Now you guys, I don't have to tell you, that the idea of a female warrior in 2022, the idea of a female warrior who takes on a traditional masculine role, who engages in combat with something else, particularly an alien, an extraterrestrial, it's a hard pill to swallow. It's not something that's easily digestible, given what we know about the differences between masculinity and femininity. But nevertheless, you have the story. And I watched Prey on Hulu. I watched Prey. I watched this film. And I was forced to go back to the original. I was forced to go back to the original. And after I watched the original, I went and I watched the subsequent versions, the subsequent iterations of Predator, the franchise. Predator 2, Aliens versus Predator, Aliens versus Predator, Requiem, Predators rather, and the other Predator film that came out some years ago. And after I did that, I was left with the sentiment that none of these iterations of the original version can compete with this version. And the reason why none of these versions can compete with the first installment of The Predator, which came out in 1987, is because the storyline and the character of Dutch in particular spoke truths about masculinity and the male situation in the world in such a profound way that these films were unable to copy or replicate. When you go back to the 1987 version and you watch this film, and if you know something about science, if you know something about biology, if you know something about evolutionary theory, if you know anything about natural selection, if you are familiar with the naturalist, Charles Darwin, who published his book in 1859 called The Origin of Species, where he introduced to the world this theory of selection, what we know today as natural selection. And he talked about species, he talked about competition, he talked about survival. If you know anything about that, then you have a deep awareness and understanding of what was happening in the film, the 1987 version of Predator. In my last video, in the last video that I did, the last live stream, I talked about the crisis of masculinity. The crisis of masculinity. And we talked about it. I talked about the crisis of masculinity in a relationship to the neoliberal villain, Andrew Tate, the person whom everyone is calling, at least on the liberal and feminist side, they're calling him the most dangerous misogynist on the internet. And in that last video, if y'all haven't watched the last video, I need y'all to go back and check out the last video. I said emphatically that Andrew Tate is very, very popular right now because he speaks to a void. He speaks to a void. He speaks to a masculine void. There is a void in terms of masculinity in the world, the Western world in particular. There is a black hole. There was a black hole in the Western world in terms of masculinity. That here we are in 2022, and you have young men who have been born since the year 2000. They've been born since the year 2000. And you have young men and you have young boys born since the year 2000, and they are adrift. They have no guidance. They have no blueprints. They have no scripts. They have nothing to help them to navigate the world that awaits them once they leave home. And in the last video, I said that this crisis of masculinity, this void, is the result of the removal of fathers, the removal of male figures, the removal of masculine authority, of structure, of order, of discipline, of all these things from the homes, the families of people who live in Western societies. And that these males who deal with this void have been primarily conditioned and socialized by females and by female emotions, female perspectives, female orientations. But although they have been socialized by females, their mothers having ran fathers off, removed fathers, pushed fathers away, pushed male authority away. Although that has happened to them, there is a biological impulse, a darn near biological instinct that yearns for what we understand as traditional masculinity. And people like Andrew Tate, who is imperfect, this guy is imperfect, and I said this before, I'm gonna say this again. I'm not a fan of Andrew Tate. I'm not a fan of this guy. I don't share many of his perspectives. I don't think that his perspective is as informed and enlightened as it ought to be. He has an alpha male ideology that's straightforward, in many respects simple or what have you. It's a little bit too simple for me. A little bit too simple for me. But despite the simplicity of his ideology, it speaks to a void in the Western world in particular, because what we're dealing with in Western society is what we're dealing with in US society, what's happening in Canada, what's happening in Australia, what's happening in New Zealand, what's happening in certain parts of Europe, the United Kingdom, with men and boys, is not happening in other parts of the world. So there is no crisis. There is no crisis of masculinity on the continent of Africa. There is no crisis of masculinity throughout the Caribbean. There is no crisis of masculinity in Latin America. There is no crisis of masculinity in Russia, Japan, China, any parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand. There's no crisis of masculinity on the subcontinent of India. The crisis of masculinity only exists in the white Western world, because the white Western world has, over the last decades, at least 50 years, attacked and assaulted masculinity. An effort on their part to dismantle it, to disrupt it, in order to elevate and promote femininity, the woman, the female. But why am I talking about predator? I'm talking about predator because I said this in my last video, brothers, that there are some real facts about masculinity. There's some real facts. If it bleeds, we kill it. There's some real facts about masculinity. And the language I'm going to use, my guys, is raw masculinity. This is raw masculinity. Raw. Masculinity in the raw. And what do I mean by raw masculinity? I am talking about the irrefutable, inescapable facts of what it means to be a man in the world. The irrefutable, inescapable facts about what it means to be a man in the world. And this film, Predator, and I'm pointing and I'm using it, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm going to say this, even Arnold Schwarzenegger, when you go back and you watch all of Arnold Schwarzenegger's films, when you go back and you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, how he started out and all of that, and you look at his success and you look at why Arnold Schwarzenegger was so popular for so many decades, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a major in his prime. When he was in his prime, he was a major symbol of raw traditional masculinity. And for this reason, men of all races and backgrounds found themselves drawn to the type of masculine imagery that Arnold Schwarzenegger represented and participated in. And to take this even further, brothers, we are in an era of woke right now. This is the so-called woke era, right? We're talking about popular culture. We're talking about a time before wokeness. This is before wokeness. It was before wokeness. Feminism existed in 1987, so did liberalism. But feminism and liberalism in 1987 were not the same as they are in 2022. Let me say it again. Feminism and liberalism in 1987 were not the same as feminism and liberalism in 2022. In 1987, Hollywood still affirmed those traditional virtues of heroic, sacrificial, strenuous, aggressive, and in many respects, destructive manhood. Because you got to entertain people. You can't. He said you can't entertain people with just heroism alone. You got to have villains. You got to have destruction. You got to have buildings blowing up. You got to have guns. You got to have military. You got to have all type of stuff going on. You got to have money making. You got to have Wall Street. You just got to have just stuff in the raw. And Schwarzenegger and people adjacent to him, people like Sylvester Stallone, Sly Stallone, they became megastars because they helped push this whole vision of raw masculinity. The Rocky franchise, Sylvester Stallone's Rocky franchise, that's about raw masculinity. The boxer. Thank you, Ray Knows. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. You guys share, you guys like, you all subscribe. This is late night. This is the late night edition of the Mad Professor. The late night edition of the Mad Professor. We are talking about raw masculinity tonight. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Here's the deal, guys. Here's the deal. We are not women. Men are not women. Men are not women. We don't live in the world as women live in the world. We don't have the same constitution as women. We don't have the same orientation of women. We don't have the same psychology as women. We are not women. And the fundamental problem that you have right now, that we have right now, in 2022, is that the people who have a very difficult time with traditional masculinity, the people who have a very, very difficult time, particularly with heterosexual masculinity, that's traditional. These people refuse to accept the fact that men and women are not the same. They refuse to accept the fact that men and women live in completely different worlds. Men and women have different psychologies. We have different dispositions. We're not the same. And these efforts to erase the fundamental difference between heterosexual men, in particular, heterosexual men and women, that effort is futile. It's a futile effort. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. The differences between men and women are biological, they're cultural, they've been around for thousands of years. We do not live in the same world that women live in. There was a line of demarcation between men and women. As I told you in the last video, that women are protected. Women are protected. Men have created a world through benevolent masculinity. Men have created a world through benevolent patriarchy. That's what it is, benevolent patriarchy. Benevolent. The whole idea of protection, men protecting women, that is patriarchal. That is benevolent patriarchy. And it's tied to the family, it's tied to culture, it's tied to the broader society and its institutions. Especially when you talk about an advanced technological society like ourselves. That when you study law, if you study law close enough, and you study law in relationship to how the law affects men and women, criminal law, family law, all sorts of law, you will see a clear demarcation between men and women. You see, prisons which exist in this country and prisons which exist all across the world. Prisons were created by men, and prisons were created primarily for men. Prisons were created primarily for men who, for whatever reason, operated, lived, and behaved outside of the law. In much of the prison building, what we call the prison industrial complex today, works in service not only to protect men from other men, reckless men, but is also created to protect women. Law enforcement, criminal justice, all of that, a lot of that designed to protect women. Military, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, National Guard benefits not only men, benefits women, and it benefits women more than men. So there are basic fundamental differences. And that's why y'all share, y'all like, y'all subscribe. If y'all want to contribute, y'all know the Cash App, $BMI 3000, Cash App, $BMI 3000, Cash App, $BMI 3000. Y'all hit the super chat. This is Friday Night Live. This is Friday Night Live. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Men don't have the same protection that women have. The masculine world is a predatory world. Let me say it again. The masculine world is a predatory world. The masculine world is a world driven by competition. The masculine world is a world driven by domination. The masculine world is a world driven by one-upmanship. That's the masculine world. The masculine world is a predatory world. Men prey on other men. I talked about the bully in my last video. The bully, you know about the bully. What is the bully? The classic bully. The classic bully represents a stronger male trying to dominate and overcome what is perceived to be a weaker male. That's predation. And you can extend that to groups, to tribes, to clans, to nations, where you have predatory men from one group or nation who seeks to use as prey, who seeks to dominate other men from tribes, groups, and nations. That's predation, competition. The rawest form that we see this is in the natural, it's in the natural world, it's in the animal kingdom, Thank you for your support, Ghetto User. Support this channel. Share, like, and subscribe. Share, like, and subscribe. This is the Friday night edition of the Mad Professor broadcast. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Raw masculinity and the Western world. Thank you, Ghetto User, for that. We live in a world of predation. Charles Darwin laid it out. He wasn't the first one, but he was the one who became famous for it. He laid it out. When he talked about fitness and he talked about competition, he talked about the species. The evolutionary theory teaches us that there is a struggle for survival. That's what evolutionary teach. When you study evolutionary theory, and this is why in the Western societies plural, there is difficulty with evolutionary thinking. They have a difficult time with evolutionary thinking because evolutionary thinking is about survival, survival, survival. Species do what they have to do in order to survive. Much of survival has to do with resources. Much of survival has to do with available resources. It has to do with the lack of resources. It has to do with competition over resources. And who is caught up in this competition? Who is caught up in this competition? Men. Men are caught up in this competition. And with this competition, you have traditions. You have traditions connected to survival, connected to, hell, conquest, domination, control, connected to success and flourishing. The ability to navigate a hostile terrain. Because that's what it means. That's what it means, guys. That's what it means to live in a state of nature. It means to deal with a very, very hostile terrain. And so we have codes of masculinity. We have rules of manhood that you find in various cultures all across the world. Rites of passages. You have rites of passages. You have men who train boys. Here's the thing. You have men who train boys for survival in the world. And much of that survival is oriented towards war. So a warrior code is erected. So you must train the boys that come along, the older males, train the younger males how to navigate a predatory terrain. They do something that the female simply, as a collective, cannot do. They just cannot do. A female cannot, and you might have some exceptions, I said this in the last video, cannot prepare a boy to ultimately navigate a predatory world, a world of predators. Raw masculinity is the ability to navigate as successfully as you can a world of predators. And ideally, boys and male youth are empowered with the wisdom of men that are older than them, and wisdom that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation, that enables them to be able to navigate a predatory, competitive world. And see, guys, this is the problem with the contemporary West right now. This is the problem. The contemporary Western world, it wants to pretend, or rather it pretends that predation, competition, are somehow minor factors in the way in which the world operates. That's what it pretends. But we know based on living in the real world, we know based on living in the real world that that's not the case. You guys see what's going on? We've been watching for a number of months now. We have been watching what's been going on between Russia and the Ukraine. We've been watching. Y'all see what's happening with Russia and Ukraine? Vladimir Zelensky over against Vladimir Putin. We see what's going on with Zelensky and Putin, Russia and Ukraine. That's an example. That's an example of predation. That's an example of competition. What you see between Russia and Ukraine right now, that's raw masculinity. That is raw how Putin operates and how the Ukraine, people in Ukraine, the war they got going on, that's raw masculinity. And you have an American culture right now. You have an American culture right now, at least half of its population, they don't want to accept the realities that are being exhibited, the human realities being exhibited with Russia and Ukraine right now. Because the people, the liberals and the leftists and all that kind of stuff, they have very utopian ideas about how they think the world should be. They have very utopian ideas about how they think the world should be. Or we can just sit down. We need to sit down at the table and negotiate. We need to talk this out. Let's just talk this out. We're gonna talk this out. We have these problems. Let's just sit down at the table and just talk this out. Let's just have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. That's how they think that they can handle it. We're just gonna have a conversation. We're gonna talk it out. Brothers, in the real world, there are very real conflicts that cannot be talked out. In the real world, there are challenges that cannot be dealt with strictly through diplomacy. There are conflicts that demand and necessitate rather straight violence, challenges. I know this sounds politically incorrect for a lot of people, and I'm not promoting violence. I need to say this clear. I'm not promoting violence here in any kind of level, but I'm talking about the realities of the world. You see, the United States had this thing called a civil war. The United States had this thing called a civil war. And this civil war lasted for 4 years. We had a civil war. The United States had a civil war because there were two parts of the country that could not sit down and negotiate. The two parts of the country could not talk things out. Diplomatic relationships or relations simply did not work. And because diplomatic relationships didn't work, you couldn't have a conversation. You had two parts of the country go to war. That's masculinity. That's masculinity. And we don't, the so-called advanced, developed world does not have an absolute, it does not have a final answer to war. It does not have a final answer to war. It doesn't. That's why every nation, every developed nation on this planet has a military. Why do we have a military? There's a reason why we have a military. There's a reason why other nations have militaries. The military and militaries exist because raw masculinity, the realities of masculinity are very, very present. They're ever present. So you have young boys and young men who are adrift. They don't have blueprints. They don't have scripts for navigating a very hostile world, a hostile world that's predatory. And if they are not prepared to deal with a hostile world that is predatory, the predators in the world will fundamentally take them out. The predators will destroy them. You have to know how to fight against the predators. This is rawness. And what has happened is that you have a whole bunch of guys who are left adrift and they're being eaten up. You have the teenagers. The teenagers feel it. The male youth, they feel it. The young men, they feel it. They feel the hostility. And they're looking for guidance. And the reality is, guys, and I'm talking about men as predators all over the world. And there are levels to predation. There are levels. I want to say this. There are levels to predation. There are levels to predation. That is, not only do men engage in predation, but human beings in general engage in predation. Human beings are predatory. The female, the woman, she has predatory instincts, but she is not in any way or fashion close to a male in what she does in terms of predation. She's nowhere near. The female predator cannot compare to the male predator. She can't. You watch that film, you go back to 1987 and you watch that film and you watch all those characters. It's so fascinating because what you have in that film is you have an apex predator who comes from outer space. You have an apex predator that comes from a different planet and comes to Earth to hunt human beings, and to hunt human beings for sport. Think about that. To hunt human beings for sport. You don't want to take the human beings and turn them into slaves. You're not hunting human beings because you have a thirst for human flesh. You want to eat these human beings. You're not hunting them as you would hunt, you know, game for food, or animals for food. You are hunting human beings for sport. The apex predator, apex, the highest form of a predator that you can imagine. And you have these men who are a part of the military, and that's key to this film. They're a part of the military, and they have been trained. They have been trained as military personnel. And in this film, you all go back and watch it, 1987. It's the story of a military unit who goes into Central America on a rescue mission to get some hostages, some people who have been taken as prisoners. But then they find out that the mission that they signed up for, this rescue mission, was not really a rescue mission. It was something else. And you had this top-notch special unit of warriors who go into Central America on this mission. And all of these soldiers, these warriors, with Dutch being the leader, they have to contend with this creature, this apex predator. And they have to use all of their skills, all of their military skills, their military strategy, their might and their muscle or in an effort to combat this apex predator. And you guys know how the story goes. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, who plays Dutch at the end of the movie, at the end of the film, Dutch is darn near he's the last person standing. You got one woman in the movie. You got one woman in the movie. Y'all go back and check out the woman in the movie. She was a part of another group in Central America fighting in the jungles. But Arnold Schwarzenegger winds up being the last man standing, having to take on this alien apex predator. And my God, if this is not raw masculinity, if this is not traditional masculinity, I don't know what is. 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 When you are forced to take on something that is bigger and stronger and equipped with more technology than you. I can't think of another image of what the masculine situation is, especially for black men in the United States, especially for black men. You have to take on this apex predator. And you can use this apex predator as a symbol, as a metaphor of all of the powerful forces in the United States. The apex predator in the film Predator is a symbol of all of the forces in the United States which are hostile to black men. The character Dutch was stripped down to everything. when it was just he and this apex predator. It was just his intelligence. It was just the jungle. It was just the natural environment around him that he had at his disposal, which he was compelled to use to bring down this highly advanced apex predator. This is it. Thank you, Christopher Harlan. You're absolutely right, brothers. This is it right here. You know what I'm talking about. This artificial thing from outer space. But Dutch did not back down. His comrades took the predator on. His comrades took him on. All of his comrades got wiped out. His entire crew got wiped out. They fought the good fight. They fought the good fight. And the good fight, guys, the good fight is the best that you can do. Y'all like, y'all share, and y'all subscribe. Y'all like, y'all share, and y'all subscribe. Cash App, $ BMI 3000. Cash App, $ BMI 3000. If you like this stream, I had to talk about this tonight. I had to talk about this because this has been on my mind. You are Dutch, black man. You are Dutch. You are Dutch. You are Dutch in that film. You are Dutch. You are Dutch. And you see who and what your competition is. We are Dutch. And you have no other choice but to deal with and to combat and to simply go to war with this apex predator. You can't run, you can't hide, you take this apex predator head on. Well, the problem that we have right now, and I'm gonna say it's over and over again, is that you have boys and you have young men who have been insufficiently trained. They have been insufficiently trained to take on the apex predator. Insufficient. They've been deprived. They have been deprived of training, proper training, masculine training, manhood training, traditional masculinity. But again, as I said, although they have been deprived of this traditional training, masculinity, they yearn for it. They yearn. So they will seek out men. They will seek out men who, in their eyes, will give them what they don't have, give them what they need in terms of training to help them navigate a predatory world, to help them to the extent that when they find themselves face to face with an apex predator, they will not be afraid of this predator, and they will do everything within their power to overcome the apex predator. Y'all share, y'all like, and subscribe. Share, like, and subscribe. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Raw masculinity demands, raw traditional masculinity demands that you take on something that is seemingly haunting and daunting. Raw traditional masculinity demands that you overcome the internal fear that will impede you from taking on this apex predator. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. The forces that are in the face of black men, those apex forces, the apex forces that impress themselves upon black men all the time, the predatory forces, all of the predatory forces that black men have to deal with in this society, all those forces bleed. They bleed. All those forces bleed. The apex predator right now is bleeding. The apex predator, guys, right now is bleeding. This thing that we have called the black manosphere is Dutch. The black manosphere is Dutch. The black manosphere is Arnold Schwarzenegger in that jungle. That's the black manosphere. And like Dutch, we have wounded the apex predator. We've wounded it. And right now, the apex predator is bleeding. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Raw masculinity. So we have young men who are watching us. We have young men who are consuming our content. And these young men are looking at us in real time, the way in which the generations in the 80s and early 90s looked at people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and all those guys who were in the action films and what have you. All those so-called superheroes. And we are displaying raw masculinity, through the use of technology. And the young guys are taking it all in. Because as I said in my other video, there is a masculine crisis. There is a major masculine crisis in the Western world. Y'all share, y'all like, and y'all subscribe. This is a late night edition. This is late night. And I needed to talk to y'all about this. That film, The Predator, thank you, Bluetooth, thank you, Blacktube. Love you too, my brother. We're going to keep it going. We're going to keep it going. Thank you, my brother. This film, this 1987 film, before The Matrix, y'all go back and watch Predator. This film has stood the test of time. It has held up over 30 years. Over 30 years has passed. And the storyline, I'm saying, is the storyline has not been outdone. No one has been able to replicate or come near the performance of Arnold Schwarzenegger in this piece. This is a masculine text, a masculine text. And young men are looking for a masculine text. They're looking for masculine text that they can read and interpret and use in their lives. You see, we give them more. I'm going to give them more than an Andrew Tate. Dr. T.S. Johnson is going to give them more than an Andrew Tate. The Green Gorilla is going to give them more than an Andrew Tate. BGS Ibmore is going to give these young men more than Andrew Tate. Because we dig deeper. We dig deeper. This is why I said in my last video that I'm reluctant to identify myself with the white part of the manosphere. I don't identify myself with the white part of the white manosphere because it doesn't go deep enough for me. The white manosphere doesn't go deep enough for me. If you notice, as we talk about, when you watch the film, here's the thing, guys. That film, 1987, Predator, that film has nothing to do with dating. I want you to notice that the film has absolutely nothing to do with dating and romance. It has nothing to do with wives. It has nothing to do with submission. It has nothing to do with game. It has nothing to do with, seducing women. Hell, it has nothing to do with a gender war. 1987, Predator. It has nothing to do with a gender war. That film, Predator, 1987, is all about raw masculinity, traditional masculinity. Masculinity with a purpose. Masculinity that is disciplined. Hell, masculinity that is sacrificial. Dutch was not an individualist. Dutch was a part of a team. You had one female in that film. Interesting role. She did stand out in the film. She did stand out. But she was a fighter too. She was a soldier, military person too. She happened to get away. The only one that got away. She didn't get killed. Notice she didn't get killed in the film. The female didn't get killed. Ah. This is raw masculinity, guys. Do you know when you study the film and you study how they made the film, you know, like I said, Arnold Schwarzenegger was at the top of his game when he made that film. Here's the behind the scenes story. Here's the behind the scenes story. Arnold Schwarzenegger brought all of his workout equipment to Central America when they filmed it. All of his weight stuff. Arnold Schwarzenegger brought his chef to Central America. And the story is that Arnold Schwarzenegger did his workouts early in the morning. And Arnold Schwarzenegger had all of the cast working out at 5 a.m. in the morning. He would get up every morning at 5 a.m. And Schwarzenegger went through these 5-hour grueling workouts every morning. 5-hour grueling workouts that began at 5 a.m. And he wore the cast out. He wore the cast members out. They tried to keep up. Carl Weathers couldn't keep up. Carl Weathers couldn't keep up. He was a professional, former professional athlete. Carl Weathers couldn't keep up with Arnold Schwarzenegger's workouts. He wore them jokers out. Raw masculinity. Raw masculinity. All the men in the film, those men, like I said, who I named, Jesse the Body Ventura, Bill Duke, Carl Weathers, those guys made their marks in the world. They were all at the top of their game at that particular time, 1987. And you're right. The women, they don't get killed. They don't get killed. None of the women get killed. None of the Predator films, they don't get killed. They never get killed. You see, we want to give them the glories. We will make her the heroine, and give her the glories of traditional masculinity. But we deprive her of the gloom. She doesn't have to live with the gloom of traditional masculinity. She doesn't have to deal with the gloom of raw masculinity. Thank you, Jared J. Thank you, Jared J, for that $10 super chat. Y'all share, y'all like, y'all subscribe. Y'all share, y'all like, y'all subscribe. Cash App, $BMI 3000. Cash App, $BMI 3000. You had some heavy hitters in that film. Bill Duke is a filmmaker and actor. Most of y'all know Bill Duke from Menace to Society. Do you remember Bill Duke from Menace to Society? You know you done fucked up, right? 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 That's Bill Duke. But Bill Duke also did Hoodlum, the movie Hoodlum. That was a Bill Duke film. Bill Duke was in Get Rich and Die Trying. Get Rich or Die Trying, the film, around 50 Cent. Bill Duke did a documentary some years ago called Dark Girls. I think it's called Dark Skin Girls. He did a documentary on dark skinned black females. I had the good pleasure years ago talking to him on the phone, talking about masculinity stuff. Writer, director, and everything. Brilliant black man. Very smart. Dealing with the masculine text. All of the stuff connected to the masculine text. I decided to come on tonight, this evening, guys. I decided to come on this evening because we have to really deal with this thing. Traditional masculinity and the void that exists and the hunger that is out there with these young men. They're hungry. They're hungry because they're not getting it from their mothers. They're not getting it from some of the men in their lives. The men who have been dismantled, the men who have been neutered, the men who have been defanged. And these boys are entering into a society that is still in a world hostile to them, a world of competition, a world of predation. It's just real competition, predation. We talked about the matrix because the matrix speaks to the world as it is versus the world that some imagine it to be or should be. There's a difference. The world as it is and the world that you want or desire. And as you know, the matrix is fear. I mean, it's predation. There's a lot of predation in the matrix, a lot of predation. Neo has to deal with predators all throughout the film. The whole force. Everybody has to deal with predators. Predators all over the place. But these are the realities that you just can't get around. And the female perspective is one that is isolated. It's an isolated perspective. The female, we have so many safety nets. We have so many mechanisms in Western society that saves them from adversity. I keep telling y'all, that saves so many from adversity. It saves them from hardship. It saves them from pain. Yeah, they talk about their pain and trauma, and a lot of times, especially in the black community, it their pain and trauma is boyfriend, girlfriend pain and stuff like that. And somebody cheated on me and, domestic violence. I don't make light of domestic violence or whatever. But their pain ain't got nothing to do with predation. A lot of times. Sometimes it does. But I'm talking about high levels of predation that they're largely protected from. The safety net. You see? I read a lot about prisons. I read a lot of literature about prisons. I read books that are written by men who have gone to prison. And I'm gonna tell you something, guys. If you want to really understand, and it's not just limited to prison, it's all over. You can find it other places. But if you want to understand how predatory men can be, if you want to understand how predatory the world can be, brother, you read about prisons, or you study the prisons, or you talk to people who have been to prison. You want to talk about some Darwinistic, ruthless, cutthroat behavior? You study prisons. Study prisons. Remember, in one of my videos, and my video I did last week on that therapist, in my video that I did last week on that therapist, one thing I said, the therapist who was berating black men for not having emotional intelligence. At the end of my video, I told black men, I said, listen, be careful about therapy. Be careful about therapy. And I tried to warn you guys in my video. I said, listen, there are some things that you're going to have to take to your grave. There are some things, guys, I said this in my video. There's some things that you're going to have to take to your grave that you don't tell anybody about, that you can't tell anybody about. And let me tell you something, guys. There are guys who have gone through the prison system in the United States of America, black guys in particular. They've dealt with so much predation, so much violence, and so much hostility directed at them that it has traumatized them so much that they have to take a lot of that stuff to the grave. They got to take it to the grave because no one will ever understand what they dealt with under that Darwinistic condition. Okay? The prison is about pure survival. Okay? That's pure Darwinism. That's the prison. It's Darwinism. Women don't know anything about that level of Darwinism. They don't. Maybe under times of war. Maybe under times of war, when societies go to war and people are just acting reckless, under times of war. But apart from times of war, they have no clue as to what men deal with in terms of predatory behavior, raw masculinity, dominance, competition, violence. And see, women are not equipped to prepare boys and youth for these types of realities. Whether you're talking about the prison or you're talking about something else, you're talking about the legal system, You're talking about capitalism. And you got to really think about capitalism. Capitalism in America. Capitalism in America is ugly. Capitalism in America is brutal. It's brutal. It's ugly. You got all these people who've been on the left and liberals, and God bless them. They talk about, you have Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, he ran for president 2 times. Bernie Sanders. And they want to socialize everything. Socialize. Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist. And a lot of those, Bernie Sanders has some good ideas. But you notice Bernie Sanders never rose to the level of the nominee for president for the Democratic Party. He never rose. Because this country is committed to a certain type of capitalism, which is cutthroat and dog eat dog. And you got to know how to navigate capitalism. Fifty Cent has been talking about this stuff. 50 Cent, I've heard him talk. I've heard 50 Cent compare the streets as we know it, the ghetto streets. I've heard 50 Cent compare the ghetto streets, the hood streets, with Wall Street. $50 Cent has talked about the hood streets versus Wall Street. And 50 Cent has gone on, he ain't the only one that's talked about this, but he's gone on record and saying that that Wall Street is more gangster. Wall Street is more gangster than the capitalist in the hood, the underground economy people. More gangster. White collar people, the white collar people with suits and ties, the people who they speak standard English and they're very, very polite and they're very gentlemanly. He said these people are more gangster than the people in the streets. And the reality is that most black men who've been limited to the streets, or I'm going to say most, but a lot of black men who have been limited to the streets, they can't deal with white capitalism. It'll take them out. Because the strategies of war, the art of war that you engage in the streets is not the same type of art of war that you engage in with respect to white capitalism. So how do you prepare people for that? We got to prepare people for that. And the mamas can't prepare them for that. Mamas can't. The mamas don't. This is raw masculinity. You guys who are in the military, you guys who have gone through the military, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the same thing. You guys who have participated in sports, you know what I'm talking about, because sports, especially sports at the highest level, it's the same thing. Women and men do not live in the same reality. We don't. Good to see you, my brother. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you, my brother. Do you know why a lot of people in this country are hostile? Do you know? Y'all share, y'all like, y'all subscribe. You can hit the Cash App, $BMI 3000. Do you know why a lot of people are hostile to the very idea? Do you know why a lot of people are hostile to the idea of a female president in the US? Y'all know why? In the United States. You know, Pakistan has had a female run the country. India has had a female run the country. A woman has ran Myanmar, which is formerly known as Burma. You have Meghan Markle, not Meghan Markle, Angela Merkel, I'm sorry. Angela Merkel, she was the Chancellor of Germany. You had Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. We've had female heads of state in the world for quite some time. We've had female heads of state in the world for quite some time. But the United States has been on the fence. It's been the last developed nation, major developed nation, to elect a woman to lead it. Americans have been reluctant to put a woman in that high level position because of all of the predatory nations that exist in the world. If America stands as the big dog, if America stands as the apex predator, can it maintain its status as the apex predator in relationship to other nations in the world if it puts a female at the head? You've got the strongest military on the planet. You got the strongest economy on the planet, which is other countries don't have. You're talking about a position that has been traditionally filled by white men. You have a position that is always prepared to defend itself. That is, America is always prepared to defend itself against threats, foreign and domestic. Can you put that in the hands of an American woman? That's the big question. Because America dominates the world, or at least it has dominated the world up until this point. And I'll be honest with you guys, I'll be glad when we go ahead and do this thing with the female president. I need we need to go ahead and let the woman go ahead and put a woman in that position so that we can move on. Hopefully, you put a woman in a position, hopefully like that, we don't go to war with anybody. She does 1 term, 2 terms at the most, and then we can move on. We can move on to other things. We ain't got to hear about there not being a female president. We can just put her, let them get it out their systems, and we can move on. But the point is, a lot of Americans don't believe that a woman can rise to the occasion if they put her in that position. They really they don't believe it. That's a masculine job. Very masculine job. Very masculine job. Barack Obama sent drones to Pakistan. Do you know how many drones were sent under Barack Obama's administration as they searched for Osama bin Laden? Do you remember when they finally killed Osama bin Laden? Under the Obama administration. Who would have thought that Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. Nice Guy, Barack Obama, would be attached to collateral damage? Because lots of people were killed as collateral damage as they, quote unquote, hunted for Osama bin Laden. But anyway, guys, raw masculinity is real. The film The Matrix is about reality. Science fiction. We got so much vocabulary from the Matrix that we use today. That's not going anywhere. But The Matrix was not the only film connected to science fiction that speaks to human realities, that speaks to masculinity, raw masculinity. My generation saw this film. Again, I told you I was a teenager when I saw this film in 1987. And the boys from my generation, those of us who were being raised by single parent households, feminism still had not penetrated the public schools at that time, not the way that they are in the schools now. Back in 1987, feminism still had not penetrated the school system the way in which it exists in the schools now. And the boys from my generation, we attached ourselves to this stuff. We were boys. It sucked us in. A lot of you guys who are in the comic books, in the superheroes, in the comic books, you were sucked into the comic book world because that world spoke to a yearning, a hunger, sensibility a rawness that comes with being a biological male. Ancient stuff that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Ancient stuff that's not going anywhere anytime soon. This stuff is irrefutable, it is indestructible, and it is inescapable. Anyway, guys, it's getting late. It's getting late. I'm going to wrap this thing up. Always remember, guys, as we deal with this space alien, as we deal with this apex predator in the Western world, always remember, guys, as Dutch said in the film, if it bleeds, we can kill it. If it bleeds, we can kill it. I'm out of here, guys. I will see you on the next live. This is another Mad Professor broadcast. BMI, Black Men's Independence, BMA, Black Men's Agency, BME, Black Men's Empowerment, and BMH, Black Men's Happiness lives and lives on. Y'all take care. I'll see you next time. Peace out.